Hello, everyone. This is Deb. I'm here with Erik Schlimmer, who is a licensed therapist, author, podcast host, veteran, and avid hiker. He's an advocate for veterans and specializes in assisting veterans in his practice. He has also been a member of UFO Twitter for some time and goes by UAP Therapist. I invited him here today to speak with me about how to best provide support for those who have had a UAP encounter. So, thank you for coming and speaking today.
Well, thanks for the invitation. I think we spoke over a year ago, so it's really nice to be back. Thank you.
Yes, the last time I spoke with you was for Deb's Data Dojo. Today, you get to come and talk to the UAP Medical Coalition. We're desperately trying to educate other mental health providers and doctors about the reality of medical concerns related to UAPs. And since you've been for some time heavily researching the topic, I imagine you have a lot to say. So, first of all, since you do work with veterans, I have to point out it seems like there seems to be a high number of veterans who have had UAP experiences. Is that something you've noticed?
I haven't seen a pattern connecting UAPs with veterans at the practice I work at. I do have some veterans who are UAP experiencers, but it came up after the fact. So it's pretty typical how my non UAP clients start having conversations about it. Is next to them is a bookshelf. And if you look at the bookshelf, there's a DSM-5 and some couples workbooks. And then they start seeing these weird books that say UFO and UAP on the spine. And then we just start talking. And they're like, "Oh, are you into this stuff?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I've got this podcast." "Oh, no way." And then I ask, "Have you ever seen something and you still don't know what it was?" And that's the way I word the question. And I've had this conversation with probably 20, 25 different clients. And it's amazing. Half of them, without hesitation, say, "Yes, definitely." I go, "Oh, really? Do you want to tell me about it?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure." So about 20% of my caseload are clients because we have a few bases here in Colorado Springs. And then, like I said, it just kind of pops up in conversation. And I've also had a couple instances where people will confide in me and tell me their UAP story. And that's when it's kind of funny. They have no clue. They haven't looked at the bookshelf. They don't know I'm into this stuff. They don't know I have a podcast. And I was like, "Yeah, I don't know. I kind of think I'm like sort of an expert in this." And they look at the bookshelf and they start laughing. They say, "Wow, how serendipitous." So that was a long way to answer a very simple question. Veterans, anybody I see, active duty, whomever, usually comes up in conversation. About half the people are convinced they saw something. They still don't know what the hell it was.
I do think people underestimate how many people have had experiences. I don't think everyone reports. I don't think everyone enters UFO Twitter, or even necessarily goes to watch content based on that. But when I bring up with people that have an interest in the topic, even in my clinic where I work, people often say, "Oh, I've seen something." That tends to be the reaction. So I think one of the mistakes that we make is to assume that people are not going to relate to the topic, so we don't talk to them about it.
Sure. And I've got this small sample. My caseload is usually about 40 clients, but again, talking about 30, about 15 of them seeing something. Well, you've got half right there. And the reactions I get run the gamut. So clients who have seen something tend to be quite serious about it. They'll send me articles. I'm sure I'll have some clients coming in next week saying, "Oh, did you hear about this Dave Grush guy?" "Oh, I'm sure you did, Erik." Something like that. But then in my field, it's a little bit different. You get the UAP UFO giggle, and a common retort to when they find out I'm into this stuff is, "Oh, that's neat." And it has this tone like, "Oh, that's neat." Kind of like if I said, I saw Bigfoot riding the Loch Ness monster, it's kind of a response like, oh, that's neat, as in, oh, that's neat. I have to go do something in another office right now. And it's this kind of awkward rhetoric of spaceships and aliens and oh, that's neat and oh, that's fun. And I don't do well at conversations like that because I take it
Yeah.
very seriously. But they're not really to blame. They're probably just like you said a minute ago. A lot of people are simply uneducated or they're reading what's coming out of the mainstream media, which is nothing short of insulting.
It is unfortunate that the people, generally in the public, even though they have these experiences and can relate to this topic, don't necessarily have the research behind it that some of us do. Some of us that go and spend hours and hours researching every day, I might add.
Sure.
Um, so, I think that is putting us at a disadvantage when we're trying to educate the mental health professionals because they don't have those hours and hours every day of knowledge. So, since we're trying to assist them and educate them, what would you recommend that they start with if they wanted to go on the path themselves?
Hmm. Well, I never thought I'd say this in my life. I think Twitter is a very good resource. It's interesting. I just ran a poll on my Twitter page saying, why are you here? And I think it was 80% of respondents said that they're there to learn. Second most popular answer was, I'm here to contribute. I know that's why I got on Twitter. It's kind of a clearinghouse for anything UAP. It's where people share articles, it's where people share podcasts. I'm sure this interview is going to be up there. It's a very nice resource where you can easily sort the wheat from the chaff. If you go on just Google and do a general Google search again, you're going to get these mainstream media articles that are either wildly inaccurate or just downright obnoxious. And Ross
Right.
Coulthart recently made that point where these people, they really don't know what they're talking about. They're kind of pop culture reporters. Um, I'm also a fan of books. I don't know if anybody reads books anymore. I think you and I do. So there's two people right off the bat. I like books. I just mentioned Coulthart. He has a really good one, and there are a handful of other ones out there, Valet, and some really trusted sources and journalists and authors. And you have to start with the basics. And I think that's a podcast, interviews, articles, and books. It can be overwhelming. I started with books myself, read about 10, and then went out to the internet and waded my way through that.
Yes, I think it's kind of dispersed all over. This topic goes in a lot of different directions. I think I always try to present it as, you know, just look at everything, try to be open minded. And then it comes to how we treat people who are coming with us into a session who want to talk about these topics. And it occurs to me that we know so much when we're interacting with them, that I have to like, first of all, I never tell them that I study UFOs.
Hmm.
I never let them know anything about what I believe. I feel like it's important to let people have their own view when they come into a session on a topic. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. It's nice to work with. I think you just said the term a clean slate. And that's what a good psychiatrist, psychologist, therapist does is they'll ask questions like, why are you here today? Or what's going on? Or what have you been doing the last week? Is this kind of these open-ended questions with absolutely no direction. So sometimes I only say, well, can you tell me about your mood? Right? That's a little bit too specific. So how was your last week? What brings you in today? What are some of your goals? Why didn't you come in 2 months ago? Why today instead of 3 months into the future? And then it's just everything's free, everything's open, and what's going to happen is they're going to bring up what is important. So it's I just got done with a session as my last session of the week, and I have a client who's a bit critical of himself because he thinks he rambles and complains, and his time's very valuable. These are only 50-minute sessions once or twice a week, so he wants to make progress. And I rarely interrupt clients, but I interrupted him tonight. And I said, hey, look, if you're bringing it up in here, it's probably important because you don't seem like the type of guy who likes to waste his time. And that kind of brings them back down. So it's kind of this balance of, hey, you're here, tell me anything you want. And I'm of a strong belief that whatever they bring up in this room, it's important. And I'd imagine you would agree.
Yes, absolutely. I also think the open-ended questions is how I handle when someone comes to me and tells me about an experience that they've had. And interestingly enough, I've definitely heard some UAP experiences from clients, but more often than not, it's actually entities that they're talking about. And I think a mistake people have made in the past is to really harp on it or stigmatize it off the bat. And I never do that. And sure enough, it's not something that plagues them. They've had an experience. They tell me about it. I don't ask for it. They just share it with me because they enjoy talking to me about things. And then I'm just like supportive. And then the next week, it's not something that's plaguing them. I think that when people have jumped on it and made it into something more, or put a lot of pressure on the person to like explain every detail and all that, they like add to whatever trauma that they could be having, if that makes sense. What do you think?
Yeah, you got it. That totally makes sense. So, of course, I was listening to you, but I was also thinking a similar example is when somebody experiences a traumatic event. The common ones I see here are sexual assault, automobile accidents, and combat. And the client goes at their own pace. Right? So when you're processing any kind of traumatic event, any kind of big event, and then maybe if you're going to do what they call exposure therapy, just kind of getting back on the horse. Let's say you were in an automobile accident and you want to get back into driving again, it has to be voluntary. I can't assign a client homework. Well, you need to drive your car 5 miles this week, 10 miles next week, et cetera, et cetera. It has to be totally voluntary if you're going to recover from that. And then it also has to be totally voluntary when they're telling their story. And if they don't know where to start, that's where I just say, well, I don't know. I guess starting at the beginning is usually best. And then they start from there. And then it just kind of flows out specific to UAPs and clients who have specifically seen me for that. The first thing they always say, all right, let's just get this out of the way, Eric. You are going to think I am crazy. And there's usually a word that starts with an F in front of the word crazy. That's how strongly they feel about it. And they'll give me maybe a synopsis of their UAP experience. And I just go, okay. And
Yeah.
they're blown away because they think I'm going to be like, yeah, I think you need a higher level of care. And by the way, people listening, when a therapist says you need a higher level of care, that's code for I don't want to work with you anymore because you're too weird. All right. So when anybody says that, they just want to get rid of you. I think you need a higher level of care. So when they tell me these stories that are absolutely fantastic, oh, I saw this orb and I was driving in a car and it followed me and all this other really intense, quite odd stuff. And I just go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
They
I
can't believe that I just didn't throw them out. I'm actually listening.
I think that's cathartic for people too, to just be able to talk about it. And I feel like I was thinking about this quite a bit today. People don't understand the history of the stigma on this topic. They don't understand that it was created when the Robertson panel gathered with the CIA. It was a group of, scientists, and Hynek was there for a bit. And essentially, they decided they needed to debunk the UFO because they were getting too many calls. And it was in the middle of the Cold War. They were concerned that if they were getting so many calls on UFOs, they might miss foreign technology sneaking into the country and disrupting things. And people were scared. So they said, let's debunk, let's use the media, and let's tell people why they're wrong that it's a UFO. And Blue Book became even lazier with their investigations after that. And eventually it was closed after another report was done by the Condon Committee, which was ridiculously bad.
Yeah.
Like, even in the Condon report, they're like, oh, we don't know what like a quarter of these are. But, of course, this is all nonsense. This is what their response was.
Right. Right. And on the note of just listening and valuing what people see, a perfect example is the the flack that David Grush is getting now. These mainstream media articles are not dismissive; they're just vicious. I was, I think, on Twitter yesterday. I gave a list of adjectives being used to describe him, and let's just say they were very unflattering. They're portraying him as a crazy person, as a nut, as a kook. And in reality, I don't sense that at all. I don't sense that as a therapist, and I just don't sense that as a decent human being. And it's amazing and almost, in a way, quite impressive that the stigma has been so durable over the last almost century now.
Yes. And I think if people were just openly asking questions when someone presents them with something, validating their client, and letting them express what they need to express, and then letting them go on their way, and supporting them with whatever they still need support with. Because of course, if they have like, some impairments in their life, or they're, not functioning, they need support with that. If they have mood issues, they need support with that. But if they just normalize the topic instead of continuing the stigma, we would be much further along with treating people.
Oh, absolutely. It's like if you were to stigmatize anything, when I was a kid, I was born in 1973. The example I'm thinking of is if you were getting divorced, God forbid your neighbors found out. Oh my God. You could walk around wearing the scarlet letter, a big D you would hang off your neck back then. And now it's not as stigmatized. And we're not at the point where people take it frivolously. It's just kind of part of our society. And that is a problem that we can address and work through. And I work with couples on that here on the couch behind me. And UAPs are no different. To say I believe that things have happened to people involving UAPs, or I believe in UAPs, is just kind of really weird wording. The example I give is, I don't believe in toasters. I just have one on my counter and it exists. And that's where I'm at the point with this evidence being overwhelming. And wouldn't it be grand if you and I lived long enough to where we had so much open evidence that there was no stigma at all, because it's pretty difficult to stigmatize something that is real. I hope I'm around long enough to see that.
Yes. So obviously, you mentioned earlier David Grush, who was a whistleblower. For those who are not aware, he came out and said that the United States did have a crash retrieval program, that he had spoken to people who had been part of that program, and they had told him other things like the entities were involved. A lot of people in the public are actually pretty dismissive, as you said, in the media. A lot of people in the UFO community are kind of in shock, I would say. I felt like there were some of them that also responded with anger towards the government because they feel like they've been lied to. So it was quite a tumultuous time, and no one's really prepared to help these people. And that's why we have to do things like UAP Medical Coalition. We need to prepare people to deal with all these people that are overcoming the stigma. and are starting to really be honest and talking about this. Um, Another factor to consider is that the United States government has stated that UAP are a real phenomenon. Not only are they spending a good deal of money on it, but they are investigating it. And for the government to tell us something's real and for people to still be dismissing people talking about it, it's like I don't understand what is going on. Like, how can there be that much dissonance? What are your thoughts on
Yeah.
all of that? Like the commotion and the dissonance.
Oh, yeah. When I started getting into the study of UAPs about 3 or 4 years now, I didn't anticipate that UAPs would be less interesting than the people involved in this. The the psychological response that people are having to UAPs is just kind of mind-boggling and also very interesting. And some of it I do understand. What I think it comes down to are a couple things. So the the class of debunkers, and there are a couple well-known ones. I think for them, it simply comes down to people do not like saying I was wrong. There's only one thing they dislike more than saying I was wrong, and that would be you were right. I think it's an ego thing. And the problem with these folks who are presented with very good evidence and they dig their heels in harder and harder, and they dig their trenches deeper and deeper, and they make their moats wider and wider, is they keep investing in what they believe. And the more entrenched they become in that belief, that by now has been proven bogus by a long shot easily, they're having a lot of trouble extricating themselves from that, because they're going to be more embarrassed than if they just conceded a year ago, 18 months ago, something like that. When it comes to the amount of evidence and combining that with Grush, I, I'm very confident that you're right, I'm right, and a lot of other people are right, that there's obviously something going on. And I think the problem with, well, I should say, not the problem with Grush's story, but the problem with people hearing Grush's story is there are a lot of people out there, they think this is the only thing. They think this is the only whistleblower, the only accusations, the only reports, the only evidence, and it's not. I mean, what Grush is contributing is significant, but if you look at all the evidence dating back about 80 years now, that UAP history and modern UAP evidence, Grush is like 1%, if that. Maybe he's a 0.5%. And that's not to dismiss what he's doing. I think it's the most important thing I've seen in the last 3 or 4 years easily. But again, the problem is people don't know the other 79 years that goes along with Grush's story. His story is important, but it's merely one component of something much bigger and powerful.
Right, and some researchers have said it goes back thousands of years.
Correct.
So it depends on if you want to look at our history in a different way and understand how it may relate to this. For instance, the Vatican was mentioned, and they have quite a library of very paranormal occurrences. And Diana Pasolka has come out and said, who by the way is, for those who do not know, both a writer and a researcher for religious studies. She has said that the Vatican has stories that sound just like UAP encounters in their files, or so I think that for people to overlook all of that and only take one story and then move on about their day is unfortunate. And especially if you are a therapist, or mental health professional who has someone coming and saying that they have seen something, and then to just not even acknowledge that the government has said that this is a real thing It's disturbing to me. Like, I don't understand why anyone would ever dismiss someone or client, especially right now. I do think also that people make this mistake where they think, that someone who has a diagnosis of schizophrenia would not also be able to see a UAP. Like, having schizophrenia doesn't make someone blind. So I don't know. There's a lot of mistakes being made. So what do you suggest we do to fix some of these mistakes?
Right. And if I may, to your comment about schizophrenia, and you and I have talked a little bit about this, is yeah, if you have a serious mental illness, you could still see a real life UAP. It's extremely annoying. And it usually comes from people who go on Wikipedia and read the first paragraph of the schizophrenia page, and all of a sudden they're experts. They'll say, well, if you see something and you think it's a UAP, it's because you're hallucinating and you're schizophrenic. And it's like, well, wait, that's the only symptom. It's like they go to work and they don't see anything else and they don't hear things, right? And they have robust personal relationships and they're very successful and they don't have disorganized thoughts. The only symptom is that they see weird things in the sky that other people are describing in similar ways. That's ridiculous. There would be other very serious symptoms attached to that. So I'll get off my soapbox just for a second and answer your question. Uh, when it comes to, excuse me, being a therapist and addressing things, and I know you know this, I know you weren't saying this, is we can't be interested in everything. So, for example, I don't work with kids. I'm not very good at working with children. I don't have any children. And so we have therapists here who are very good at that. I'm the veteran guy. I'm the soldier guy. I'm the UAP guy, and I'm the couples guy, right? So perhaps we could have a system, just like I said, right? So if you read my bio and my colleagues' bios, you can see who is a good fit for you. So it's like, oh, I'm a combat veteran with PTSD. I think I'll see Erik. Oh, I'm a kid with dual diagnosis. I'm going to see Gabby. So it would be nice, excuse me, if we had some therapists out there who knew about UAP history and modern UAP evidence, and if they had some training on addressing mental illnesses such as anxiety, acute stress disorder, and post traumatic stress disorder, wow, that would be great. And how I want to be alive to see a live UAP, and I want to live long enough to see that stigma shattered. It would also be nice if this became so clear that it's real and so relevant to our lives that we could have therapists who that is one of their areas of expertise, and they would have to be educated about this. Now, I did contact an online training organization. It's where I take my continuing education units, and I basically said what I just said now. And I was obviously stonewalled. We went back and forth for like 4 months because I proposed a course, right? So I had some teaching experience. I've been a therapist for a while. And I was like, I don't know, this sounds really important to me. Half my clients say they saw something and people are actually seeking me out specifically for this reason. Maybe you could offer a training like this. And I don't think they had the guts to say, you know what, you just sound like a weirdo and please stop emailing us. I think they just wanted me to go away. And eventually I did.
Yeah, so luckily there are other organizations that are working specifically on the DSM-5 issue, which I'll address in a moment for those who are not aware, and working on getting some really good papers out, like EPRC with Daniel Ingram. Opus is trying to do some research work to provide to therapists and so on. And, there's lots of clinicians that are just secretly interested in this topic and they're afraid to talk about it. But I wanted to explain the DSM 5 issue for those who are not aware. the reason that Erik had to try to address this, and the reason that I wasn't taught anything in undergrad about this at all when I got my degree in psychology, is because the DSM 5 basically has brushed aside what they call abduction syndrome. And really the research for this is really run the gamut. It's gone from either these people are schizophrenic or they're completely normal. Like it depends on where you look. Like you can't get a consensus. I think I've also seen that people who with experiences have more fantastical thinking is like what the only thing they could come up with. Well, if I saw a UFO, I'd probably end up with more fantastical thinking. Like that's which came first, the UFO or the fantastical thinking, Or is it possibly the people who are gravitating to these paranormal topics just happen to be more capable of seeing a UFO? Like so the scientific part of psychology is kind of missing the mark. They're all over the place and they're not really getting to how to treat people.
Yeah, I agree. Again, I was listening, but I was also thinking back to when I got my master's. It was a social work program with a clinical concentration. Where we're all newbies. We don't know about this stuff, and we'd have some really good professors who had their own practices. They were always the best. This is what this illness looks like, and this is what this illness looks like. And can you imagine? Erik Schlimmer raised his hand. Yeah, Dr. Toslin, I got a question. Yeah, uh, should they add a section in the DSM-5 about UAP experiencers? That everybody would burst out. They would think it's a joke. They would be like, "What is up with this dude, Erik? I like a guy with a sense of humor." That's what they would say. And just to back up a minute, I do know a handful of therapists, psychologists, anthropologists, etc. Not here, just out there somewhere, and they can't even put their real name on Twitter. And I've invited them on my podcast, and they're like, "Dude, I wish I could do it, but I am going to be the laughing stock of my department." So we kind of have these dark alley conversations, this professional me who just doesn't care at all what people think, and the other folks who are like, this could actually ruin my career, which is so bizarre because all they're doing is stating facts, but it's so stigmatized. They think these facts are as real as when I started Bigfoot riding on the back of Loch Ness. And of course, Bigfoot has a big cowboy hat on. So it's just so weird that your career could be put in jeopardy because you're more educated on something than your colleagues. It's just totally bizarre.
So let's talk about this bizarre mentality with the stigma on a different angle. Okay. So,
Mm-hmm.
one thing I can't get over is that we ever told pilots not to report seeing an object over our skies. Like, we would ever tell the people that are meant to protect us to not tell us if an object is over a nuclear power plant. Like, what the heck? Like, they're supposed to be protecting us, but they're not allowed to say there is a large object over our nuclear power plant. And they were heavily penalized if they did. They were threatened if they did. They were told that, they would have to go see a doctor and be basically diagnosed as if they were, mentally ill. So many different tactics were used. So what do you think of that aspect, of the psychology behind that? Like, I can't get over that. Like, be quiet, don't defend us. Like, what was that?
Yeah, I was thinking of the former, I think he was a Navy fighter pilot. If not, please forgive me. If not Navy, Air Force's Chris Lato, who has a great podcast, and he was dropping more f bombs than a former paratrooper. I mean, he addressed exactly what you're saying. It's like, just, you didn't see anything, don't report anything, don't tell me, I'm not telling you anything. Nothing to see here, folks. And when you do that, you're basically telling people to shut up and you're going to ruin their career, or you're implying that they're crazy. And so that's kind of a lose-lose situation. Either you are sane and your career is over, or wow, maybe I am nuts, and you start diagnosing symptoms in yourself that don't even exist. It's, the whole, my undergrad is in speech communication, with a concentration in public speaking. The worst thing you can say is no comment, because people think, oh, they must be up to something, right? That's the only reason they would say no comment. And people feel that way nowadays about the Air Force, who have been mysteriously silent on all of this, right? So you could say nothing, and that's not very good. You could say no comment, which is even worse, or you could have the fortitude and the morality to come out and tell the truth. Why the truth would not be told, I'm not exactly sure, but I'm under the impression this is such a coveted technology that we're not talking to anybody about it. And if you don't like that, too bad.
I do think we do have some problems with the purpose of the secrecy. Um, so some people do want the technology and they're really angry that we're not being given the technology. Although I'm also, I have to say, afraid of humans having that technology personally. Um, but, for those who are not aware, there are FOIAs talking about China and Russia working together on UFO crash retrievals. There's documentation showing that, other countries all over the world have been working on UFOs. So a lot of them get handed to the United States. It's worth saying. There was a whole program for that. All of that is in documents that people can access open source through government. But so one of the problems is the technology, but the other problem is some people just want to know the purpose of the occupants, and others want to meet the occupants. They have an attachment and a connection to those occupants. And then there's also like the philosophical issue of everyone just wants to feel like we're not alone. We're not just a little blue dot in a giant universe. And then there's the, sort of academic perspective of what will this tell us about ourselves? It just, there's so many different aspects to figuring out this issue, and all of it results in like this psychological response. So, what can we do about this overall psychological response that people are having, like that anger that Chris Leto what recently had when he was realizing the government definitely was lying to him? I've seen that in FOIAs, by the way, the lying. I was reading about it. I almost laughed a few times at some of it because it was so outlandish. They would just lie to people left and right and shut people up. But yeah. So, what do you think about the overall psychological response that people are dealing with?
Yeah, so somebody well informed like yourself or Leto, I could see where the anger comes from. Um, and I do see both sides of it. So when people are saying, look, stop this nonsense, stop lying and obfuscating and saying no comment and just saying that's not my department. And then you go to that department and they say that's not my department. Just what do we have? We as in humanity. So I get that argument. I'm not exactly sure what we have. Apparently, we have fully intact UAPs that work. But beyond that, I'm not sure what the intention of the occupants are. I don't think it's evil, but I'm always thinking, maybe people know things I don't know, and it would be best not to tell us what it is. I don't feel that way, but I think it's a possibility. And I'm wondering what you think. I was talking to my friend the other day about this, and let's say we have 15 UAPs, and Russia has one, and China has one. I I wouldn't ask for this, but if somebody just took them and destroyed them, just ground them up into dust and got rid of all of them, I wouldn't mind at all. And I'm borderline saying that's a good idea. I'm under the impression this is something so advanced and so powerful that a bunch of 2023 humans, which are basically just a bunch of drunk monkeys compared to the UAP occupants, I don't think we have any business dealing with something that powerful. So I'm not asking for that, but if that happened, I think it's like a Pandora's box thing. It would be something incomprehensibly powerful that we couldn't control. I don't know how many people are thinking along those lines. I'm wondering what you think.
Yeah, I think that is where some of the fear comes from. I think some people are constantly considering this to be an advanced form of life with better technology, with better capabilities. They're able to dodge missiles and so on and so forth. However, I've heard other things. I've heard that
Okay.
we can take them down, that we know how to do it. I've heard that they're not all occupied, that some of them are basically like drones, or
Mm-hmm.
some of, that, of course, some of the technology, not um, all of it, but some of it actually is foreign technology getting mixed in with these UAPs. So people, are a little confused about which is which at times. So I think we add fear to something that we don't fully understand. And the best way to handle fear is to get information. And if the government was more transparent, I think people would be less scared. I really do. Um, for instance, the entities that are often described as coming out of these UFOs seem really fragile to me. Um, they're very vulnerable. And actually, I have a sense of sympathy for them. And I don't know how many listeners will agree with that, but I don't think there's a lot of them. Otherwise, we'd be seeing even more UFOs now than we do. So I actually think they're actually pretty vulnerable. So I don't have the fear that other people do. I think that it's sort of like, I think I always say this, like Elon Musk, he has a spaceship, right? He has a fancy car, he has the Tesla. Now he's putting circuits in brains with Neuralink. Do I think he's an advanced person or a superior being? Am I afraid of Elon Musk? Absolutely not. And if he didn't have his spaceship or his car or his Neuralink and all that stuff, he'd be just as vulnerable as I am. So that's how I think of it. I think also people add a lot of like human characteristics to something that may not be human, and like they add a lot of lore too. Like they give names that I kind of flinch at because we just don't know that. We don't know those things
Oh, you make
until transparency happens.
yeah, we fear the unknown, right? That's why we don't. When you're a kid, you don't like a dark closet. It's like you don't know what's in there. There might be something under your bed, and you don't want to look. And you bring up some really good points. Um, and obviously, if we had, again, since we fear the unknown, wouldn't it be nice to get some more information? And I do, well, I don't know if the word is like, but I understand, and it's very endearing that you have some sympathy for them because, yeah, everything I've read, they're very physically fragile creatures. It's just an interesting perspective that you offer. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I will say though, that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to safeguard. Because
Yes.
obviously the other part of UAP Med is we're looking at the medical effects, and these craft have radiation that emits from them, and the occupants sometimes seem to be using electromagnetic technology. to either change people's memories or make them feel euphoric or make them feel really scared, even. A lot of people have talked about like something getting waved in front of them, like a tool. And it reminds me of what's happening now with what we're doing as humans to other people. We're using these electromagnetic wands on people to try to change their brains. Right now, it's happening. Um, there's a lot of parallels I've noticed with what's happening with UAPs and what's happening with humans. And I think I'm more afraid of humans, if I have to really be honest, because the things that we do are really scary, and our technology seems people don't like it when I say this, but it seems to be catching up with everything we're talking about with UFOs, like including telepathy. Like, have you heard about the brain computer interface projects?
I've only heard the term. I don't know anything about it.
Right. So there's a lot of them going on. DARPA has them. Universities are working on it. They're essentially trying to tap into the human brain and send the information to a computer. Then the computer uses that information to either put an image out so that someone can actually read that brain, right? They're working on that. Then there's also where they're attempting to move objects with the computer after the brain is sending information to the computer. This sounds a lot like technology that seems to be associated with UFOs. And, when we talk about things like Neuralink, it's not a great big leap to me that things like Neuralink might be used for people to communicate directly into someone's head. So for me, I'm more afraid of humans. For us to have that technology, for us to be doing these things, I feel like we're outpacing ourselves, like we're going too fast. Like all this technology that we've been doing, it's really only been within 200 years. And out of thousands and thousands that we've been here on this planet, so it concerns me. That's where my fear is.
Yeah, it is advancing quite quickly. And one of the reasons I had only heard about that and not know anything about it is I just don't want to know. I come here, I go to work, I read about UAPs, and I go in the mountains by myself every weekend. And that if I was better educated in this rapid advancement of technology and then asking the question, well, who's at the wheel of this ship? Oh, it's just kind of a free for all. You invent it as quickly as you can. I think I'd be anxious. I'm one of the most boring people you've ever met, and it's by design. I like when nothing happens. It's awesome. It's so to have that these dramatic advances so quickly and changing our world so quickly, and then maybe being used in inappropriate ways. I think I would be anxious. I would feel like I couldn't keep up. I'd feel like an anachronism.
Right. So the important thing though is when people have these anxieties, be it because of what humanity is doing and all the things that humanity has endured, including the pandemic, which has been a significant problem psychologically for people, and NHI and UFOs, all of that stuff. When it comes to therapy, I always just encourage people, you treat the symptoms. Like when someone comes to me, I don't always ask them, why are you anxious? I tell them how to get better with anxiety. I work on how do we improve the anxiety because I can't necessarily take away the cause. I can't necessarily do something about the cause. I may not have that power to do the magic wand that makes the cause go away. So I think that when people are treating people coming in who have these fears or these issues, they should be focusing on treating the fear and the issue, not necessarily saying, you know what, let's talk about that UFO thing. and then putting in their own judgment in when it comes to the UFO topic. That's my opinion. But I know other people think that someone should believe their client. What do you think about that?
Oh yeah, I agree with you. Right. So anxiety, the definition I use is worry without very good evidence. So being worried is actually kind of a good thing. If you just went through life cavalier, that probably wouldn't work so well, right? So if I'm doing a really bad job as a therapist, I'm just like goofing off and I'm late and I'm like just not a good therapist overall. I might be worried that I'm going to get fired. And that's really good because maybe I'll shape up and then I can keep my job. Anxiety would be I'm a fine therapist, always show up on time, great caseload, great feedback from clients, but I just always think I'm going to get fired. Well, that's really bad. That's anxiety. And so when people get this, if people want to worry, that's fine. It serves a purpose as long as it's in bite sized chunks. It's not 24/7. We're not losing sleep. We're not having these racing thoughts. But then when it comes to anxiety, the what a lot of people do is the most common thing I see when it comes to anxiety. They'll do what we call fortune telling, right? So this is going to happen, and oh my gosh, I bet this is going to happen. I think this is going to happen. Surely this is going to happen. This is going, and what they're doing, they're projecting this future. And fortune tellers are good at two things. They're good at being confident, and they're good at being wrong, right? So we don't have evidence that this is going to happen. We're just projecting that thought. So what we need to do is just kind of everybody calm down, take a breath, come back, and it's facts, evidence, reasoning, logic. What are the chances of this happening? So if somebody has a fear of flying because they think the plane is going to crash, it's possible, not probable. And we know it's not probable because of facts, evidence, reasoning, logic, and data in that case. I mean, anxiety can be crippling, and I feel for people who have really bad anxiety. It is a curse. I mean, can you imagine going through life where you often think, or maybe all the time think, but usually often think, something horrible beyond your control is going to happen? What an unnerving, terrible feeling. And you made a great point. So when it comes to, let's say, UAPs, for me, what gives me anxiety, the advancement of technology, those aren't going to go away, right? So we can't say, well, we'll just get rid of UAPs and we'll go back to the Stone Age for Erik. That ain't going to happen. So you're absolutely right. It's like, this is a situation we're in, and now what are we going to do? That's a great approach.
Right. And I really hope that we also get that transparency to like sort of relieve some of the anxiety. I have actually said the fact that they haven't provided that and that they've made people feel stigmatized and they've made it so that we're like scraping together stuff now, trying to prepare people and trying to help people. And a lot of civilian work has been done, actually. A ton of civilian work has, like, MUFON has a support group. You know, since the beginning, civilians have become involved and tried to support each other. All of that is gross negligence. The fact that they are not helping people understand this, like, if they had normalized it from the beginning, we would be in a different place. People are completely cool with giant squid. They understand that gorillas are real. They're cool with some of the other strange things on the planet. You know, honestly, people. I was just watching a documentary about people who live next to a volcano. Unfortunately, the documentary was about how it erupted. But you know, the people who live there are still living right near a volcano. You know, they normalize the terrible. Um, but if you don't normalize it, if you don't have the conversation, if you don't let people deal with it, and you're just basically re-traumatizing them.
Yeah, without giving them information, they'll just think of horrible scenarios on their own.
Exactly. And I think people should get some credit. I do. Like a lot of people, okay, we're just going to have to talk about this. A lot of people like to
Yeah.
scold the UFO community, and they like to say that it's a cult and it's all belief based and all this stuff. But I find a lot of really rational, intellectual people in the community who are really good at policing themselves and trying to stay open minded.
I
So,
totally agree.
yeah.
I've met some super smart people, articulate, well educated, totally reasonable. I also like when people in our community, if there's some kind of just made up silly story, really bad evidence, we're kind of the probably the second ones to say this just doesn't this isn't a good look for us. I don't think this is accurate. There's a lot of good evidence that we already have, so there's no need to muddy the waters. Some of the brightest people I've met are in this community. It's really nice, and the kindest people as well.
And people might be surprised to hear this, but I stay really open minded with this topic. Like I don't necessarily rule out anything. I do follow the fact that some of this technology, like some of these triangles, are probably ours, and I don't rule that out. I look at all of it, and I tend to judge the characters, as people put it, that come before us, both on their good and their bad, and accept them as they are without necessarily, as some people put it, worshiping them. Like there's a lot of like a it's like a secondary level of stigma. If you support this topic, people are going to attack you.
Yeah, yeah. The cult, the word cult, I've heard worship. It's interesting. Those are the two words chosen that I see often.
Now, to be totally fair, yes, there have been cults, but there's actually been full religions based on UFOs. Um, you know, some might argue whether or not some of those count as religions, but there's like entire groups of people who are practicing religions based on UFO histories. So I don't know. I think I can think of three. I think Nation of Islam, Scientology, and if I remember correctly, some Mormon roots are
Hmm.
from something to do with UFOs too. So I guess my point is, you know, have there been some cults? Yes, there have been, and I assure you, I stay away from like just sticking with one belief system partly for that reason. Do I instinctively think I know what's going on? Of course I do, because I'm human, but I also am willing to accept that more than one thing is going on, and I'm not going to be led by the nose. And I think it's it's a shame that people just assume that if you're studying this topic that you're just doing it blindly and dumbly and that you're in a cult. Like it's sad to me. It's another level of stigma.
I agree. Yeah, everything in moderation.
Right. So, Eric, thank you so much for coming and talking today. Is there any final statements that you want to make on the topic of helping people with the UAP topic within therapy?
Sure. And I give this, I don't really give advice. I'll say a general guide, some general knowledge, whether it's somebody who was in that horrible car accident, combat, going through a particularly nasty divorce, experiences of severe mental illness, having experience with a UAP. This is all very heavy stuff. And if I were you, I would be very careful who you confide in. A lot of people who we confide in, they usually give advice, right? And uh, people who give advice, I give them the advice. If somebody wants your advice, the sentence will begin with, I need your advice. If it doesn't start with that, that's not what they're looking for. They're just looking for somebody to listen to. Okay. Or somebody to listen to them, excuse me. So you have to be very careful who you confide in. A lot of people just like to give advice. We're natural fixers. And sometimes when somebody says something heavy to the listener becomes very uncomfortable. It's actually a tall task to find a non professional, like a friend, family member, whomever, who's a really good listener. It's very difficult to find. So I would just say be very careful who you confide in, because the last thing you need is to be dismissed and feel worse.
And definitely something that I hope the UFO community will hear also, because they are very quick to attack each other instead of support each other. And we will get much, much further if we could just start being more supportive and just let people say what they need to say.
That would be great.
Right. So, Eric, could you please tell people where they can find you?
Oh, yes. You can find me on Twitter, and it's just UAP underscore therapist. If you want to send me a note there, that's fine. I work at a private practice in Colorado Springs called Willow Creek Wellness, and I'm accepting a couple clients, but usually my roster is quite full. It's good for business, but we have a lot of problems in society. I'm just very thankful that I can help in any way possible, just like you do, Deb. I really appreciate you inviting me on. You have been in this game much longer than I have, and you do great work. And I really look forward to what's coming around the bend in the next few years. So thanks again for having me.
Well, thank you so much. And I hope that you're going to come back and hopefully you'll be on a future UAP Medical Coalition mental health panel with some other people who are in the field. The last one I think was pretty game changing for some viewers. I think it's comforting for them to know that there are licensed, educated therapists on their side, whether or not, belief comes into the picture. But for us, I think it's about knowing, isn't it? It's knowing comes into the picture for some of us.
Absolutely.
Okay. So thank you for those who listened so much. I appreciate you. And I'm going to say goodbye for now. Please, again, reach out to Eric if you want some more information from him. And of course, you can reach out to me at Study of UAPs or through the UAP Medical Coalition. Take care.